Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the Tech Talk this month. Um, I think what we'll do is give everyone just maybe another minute or so to join. All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So I am Leanne West, and I'm the Chief Engineer of Pediatric Technology for Georgia Tech. And I'm so glad that you all could join us for the Pediatric Tech Talk today. We're going to be talking about the Global Center for Medical Innovation and what kind of things that they can do to help you bring a pediatric device to market or an adult device to market too. We're going to focus on pediatrics, but they actually do everything pediatric and adult, any kind of medical device. So today we have Saylan Lukas and Amy Leiter, and they both work at GCMI. And I am going to let them share a little bit about what GCMI does, kind of at an overview level.
Thank you, Leanne. Hi, everybody. My name is Amy Leiter. I'm the Executive Director for Business Development and Strategy at GCMI. GCMI we are here to advance or accelerate medical device innovation. We, as Leanne mentioned, we can help in all areas, whether it be pediatric or adult medical devices. However, we do, we're very mission driven, and pediatrics is extremely important to us. We can take a concept from a back of a napkin and we can take it all the way through commercialization. Saylan, who's on the call today, has a very talented team of engineers with biomedical background and mechanical engineering, and they are very willing and able to assist in developing any product ideas that people have. Let's see, what did I forget, Saylan?
That was great. No, that's spot on.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Saylan Lukas, the Director of Design and Development Engineering at GCMI. I actually started my career designing and developing pediatric mandibular distraction devices way back in the day, doing orthopedic craniofacial reconstruction. And that was a really great experience where I got to work with some of the top pediatric surgeons around the country and really got an appreciation for working with much smaller devices. So these devices were for lengthening the mandible. And so they were implants, mostly made out of stainless steel and titanium. But we also did use resorbable polymers, so you didn't have to have a second surgery. Then later in my career, I also got a chance to work on some more pediatric specific devices for cranial stabilization, for intraoperative neurosurgery. So you could do intraoperative MRI imaging or CT scanning, as well as surgical navigation and integration. And it was really one of the main reasons why I wanted to come to GCMI, to join a company, an organization that has such a deeper sense of purpose than just profit. And so that's what I really enjoy about GCMI and the leadership at GCMI and these partnerships with the PTC and other groups where we can really push forward, pediatric technologies that sometimes don't get as much attention as they deserve.
They definitely don't get as much attention as they deserve. And I will also say you brought up an interesting point when you were talking about the mandibular stretching, thinking about pediatrics isn't really all about making a device just smaller. There's a lot of different things we have to take into account when we think about pediatric patients and how we take care of them and the devices we need to use with them. A lot of things do just get made smaller and then are used in the pediatric space, but that's not always the best way to go. So, Saylan or Amy, why is pediatric device innovation important, and how is it a little bit different, really, than just becoming a smaller product?
I'll answer quickly, and Saylan can jump in wherever he likes. But one of the things about pediatrics is it is a smaller market, but also the fact that the children grow. And so the devices, if they're implantables or otherwise, they have to grow with that child. So it's multiple iterations of a device if a child is growing. And that takes time, money, and resources. It's also, it's a very valuable population. We really want to care for our children. We want to ensure that we're doing the right thing for them. And what I love to see is a lot of the hospitals are the children's hospitals are getting behind that. And that's something that GCMI is doing right now, is really partnering with children's hospitals to help them with their innovation groups. And they come to us and want to bring on board, they want to hire their own engineers to do the work, or, they want to develop their own QMS system, which is critical in the process. But as we start to talk to them, they really can utilize GCMI as a resource. So it's good to have those partnerships with the children's hospitals, because they truly recognize why the devices need to be different than a typical hospital that has both children and adults, and they can put resources behind it to help support it. But I don't know, Saylan, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, definitely. And I agree with all of that. And you're right, it's not just the size, but oftentimes it's the forces. So going back to the mandibular stretching distraction, those devices were initially designed for adults that needed a lot more force. And so you need to have a bigger device. So it's really tough then when you need to find a predicate device to use for clearance to get approval with the FDA. You may not have that data. It may just be for adults. So for this specific instance, we actually had to do a clinical study to gather data with younger patients so that we could then justify being able to have a smaller device. And so it's really important to, at the very beginning of a project, be working with your clinical team and identifying those like significant differences between the adult and the pediatric populations.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely imperative to work with the clinical team. I think that's true for a couple of reasons. Is one, we want to make sure that we're building a device that is actually going to have a clinical need and going to get used in the clinic. But then two, we need to make sure as we build it, we take into account all of the physiology and things like that the clinician is going to know that we are not going to know. And in addition, when we build something, we want to make sure it works in their workflow, their daily workflow, and how they're going to use it. So 100%, I think it's very important to include the clinician the entire way through the process. So that is something we try to do at Georgia Tech in general, is work really on only clinically driven problems and making sure that clinical team stays involved. So I think that's really great that you mentioned that. So let's see, pediatric device development. I know you mentioned the FDA and the regulatory part just a second ago. What can GCMI do to help a team who's bringing a device forward to either understand what's going on at the FDA or to help them through that FDA process and what they need to do?
Yeah, so our feasibility process, which we've called phase 0, it's a holistic approach. Oftentimes people come to us with just wanting a prototype, and we make lots of prototypes, but we oftentimes tell them to pump the brakes. It's important to take a holistic approach to begin with, and the FDA regulatory path is a key piece of that you really need to get a good understanding before jumping right to the prototype. And so we oftentimes help innovators, understanding what is the classification of the device, what's the risk level, what are some predicate devices that are on the market that you can reference? Are there other reference devices for similar technologies? And is there no predicate device, in which point it's probably going to be a longer path to the market. But also it's really important is to understand the consensus standards. So there's lots of standards in terms of testing. And so it's really important to know the regulatory burden, the hill that you're about to climb before setting off on this journey.
Yeah, so for the person who maybe in the audience doesn't know what a predicate device is, can you just briefly describe that?
Yeah, a predicate device is just a device that's already been approved and is on the market.
Okay.
And
Good.
so then you have to have the same indications for use as how that device is being used on the market. And then if you have some minor changes to that, it's okay. You can have some reference device information and then kind of justify that, why the difference is acceptable to get that approved.
Okay.
And one of the things that I'll mention with regards to the FDA is they've really been putting a huge emphasis on pediatrics and a lot of funding behind pediatrics and guidelines that are specific to pediatrics, because the FDA realizes that it is a market that is in need of all of those things, and it's special and it can't be treated like it's, an adult market. GCMI has worked on projects and medical devices in the past year or so where an innovator has come to us with an idea, and they have researched it, they have bounced the idea off of friends, colleagues, peers. And as GCMI takes them through that feasibility process, it really allows the opportunity to vet against a lot of different categories, whether it be, what's the FDA regulatory pathway, what's the IP, is there freedom to operate, what does the technology look like, what's the market, what does insurance reimbursement look like. So in that feasibility process, we'll take that product or that idea and kind of push it against all of those different categories. And this one product that I'm thinking about, they came to us with one idea, and I really can't say what it is because of non-disclosure. But through this vetting process that they did with GCMI, they were able to, kind of change and pivot to a better market, to something that they could get through the FDA process quicker because of other devices that were similar and already approved. So it was a much quicker path to get to market. And that's really critical at the early stage of doing devices like this. You kind of remove some of those speed bumps or walls that you're going to come up against. But, with all of that, I think funding is always a critical piece of that feasibility process. And then to move forward in our process after phase 0, we go to, phase 1 through 5. It's costly. You don't want to make mistakes early on, but the government, through a number of different grants, have funding opportunities for pediatric devices. And it's definitely worthwhile to go look there, as well as, other pediatric associations around the U.S. that are always looking to fund new innovative ideas for pediatric medical devices.
And I see we have a question in chat, so I think I'll just go ahead and ask that now as opposed to waiting. Colleen asks, are you in a position to shadow clinicians, mainly surgeons, and give feedback or recommendations for future device development? And I will say, in my role as Chief Engineer of Pediatric Technology, I definitely can do that. But Saylan or Amy, does GCMI do anything like that?
Yes, definitely. That is, I think, a very critical piece of the process. So yes, whenever possible, we go shadow surgeons or whoever the user is and really understand the clinical workflow. And so we document, all of our observations, discuss with the clinicians, the whole clinical staff, to really understand what are the needs of this device. And I think it is really a critical piece to the product development process.
And I'm going to add on to that quickly before we move to the other questions. But in addition to bringing GCMI on board, if you're at a hospital, working within a hospital, obviously they need to approve that as well. But it's very good to bring their value analysis or their procurement or supply chain people in the loop as, as you're going through this process as well, because there's a lot involved on the hospital side is, how to order, is it covered by insurance, or would it be covered by insurance? What's the outcome, related to a device that they might be using currently to something that's novel and new? How do you clean a device? Does it require a different cleaner? How do you store the device? Saylan and I were at a meeting yesterday talking about devices on carts and how the hospitals are very fatigued right now with multiple devices on multiple different carts, and how do they manage that? So I think, sometimes it's never too early to just have the conversation going, with the administration from the hospitals, the value analysis team, who's kind of like the front door marketing when you're really thinking about what a go-to-market strategy looks like for a new device. Having all of those inputs is just going to make a stronger story for that device as you go through the commercialization process.
Great. And we have another question, and we probably should have said this in the beginning, but how does GCMI relate to Georgia Tech? So GCMI is an affiliate of Georgia Tech, so they're really near campus, and we work closely with them, but you are a separate legal entity. Do you want to talk about why that's important?
I can touch on it briefly, and then Saylan,
Yeah.
you let me know what I'm missing. But we are a nonprofit affiliate of Georgia Tech. We were set up specifically to allow both industry and the Georgia Tech faculty to utilize our resources through product development all the way through preclinical work. We have our, own insurance, our own indemnification, which keeps Georgia Tech at distance from, any issues that potentially might arise. Just gives them some protection. It also allows us to work around any caveats that Georgia Tech would have with IP. So GCMI, I think a really critical piece of our organization is that we do not take IP. And so somebody can come to us and that IP stays that inventor's or innovator's IP. And that is, that is not the case with Georgia Tech. It would, go to their tech transfer or office. And then also another key piece of why we were set up, and it kind of goes back to the indemnification, but we can also be manufacturer of record for medical devices and pulling those early batches together that would be used for, potentially clinical testing or, early to market type product that people would want to get out. So the fact that we, have our own insurance, our own indemnification, we don't take IP, and we can be the manufacturer of record is really, a big reason why GCMI was set up the way that we were. But, but we're closely aligned with Georgia Tech, and we do a lot of work for Georgia Tech, but not solely work for Georgia Tech. We have many new entrepreneurs, innovators, and industry partners that we work with, in addition to many hospitals where we're helping their innovation groups develop product ideas, medical devices, and commercialize those.
Yeah, so I'll just add on to something you said when you mentioned IP. So if you were to work with Georgia Tech, say, we might be able to give you a jump start on what you're developing, because there might be IP on campus that already suits part of the needs or can be changed a little bit to really get you moving somewhat faster. But we don't take IP solely. We do split it with the other inventors. So the hospital or clinicians, nurses, whoever it might be, is also part of that, because we make sure that everybody is involved in the entire process, and therefore IP is shared. But I think there are certain circumstances where there's an idea and it makes sense to just start with GCMI. And then in that way, like Amy said, then there is no IP taken, and it remains solely with the clinician or the hospital who's bringing forward the device or the problem. So thinking about things like that, I think that that's really good. We have a couple of questions about funding. So you mentioned funding to be able to do some activities with GCMI. And so one of the questions is, do you need to have funding to provide your services, or do you support those funding, trying to raise funding activities to be able to build something? So maybe just address costs of working with GCMI.
Yes, you do need funding. We are a fee-for-service consulting group, but we help innovators all the time with grant applications. So we can help with writing. We can help with some of the deliverables that you would need to plug into your application. So we can help with many of the things that the grants are looking for, or for investors that they'll be wanting to include in your slide decks. We help with all phases of the process.
And we had a baby shark tank about 2 years ago, a year and a half ago or so, and Saylan and Leanne were very familiar with that event, and we're looking to do it again. We just need to really find the right time and space where we have the engineers that we can dedicate to a project like that, because we think it's so important. So, there's a number of organizations throughout the U.S., like GCMI, who did the baby shark tank, but they're looking to fund projects. And I would just say, don't underestimate the need for funding. And these are great supplements to an overarching funding strategy. But the most important thing, if you're passionate about an idea and really feel that it's the right medical device, and is to go through the feasibility process and raise enough funds to go through that, because that's going to give you really specific information that you're going to need to get the right investors in place, with the right amounts, to move forward into the product realization. It gets everybody nodding their head yes, that this is what they want to get behind, and can really make a robust impact and strategy on potential, investors. So GCMI does not necessarily fund. It would be so hard for us to pick which products to fund and which ones not to fund. Because we want to fund them all, and we believe in them all, and we believe in all the innovators behind these projects. And one thing that I always say is, like, the innovator, the inventor, like, keep their passion. I mean, that is going to drive this, your project or your product forward, is that entrepreneurs or innovators' passion, and then build the team around that. And one of the key pieces is the financial aspects. So bring somebody on board that can help raise the funds. But as Saylan mentioned, we are fee for service. We are an organization that needs to keep our lights on, and we have really talented employees that we need to keep employed. I would say, because we're a nonprofit, we can be more reasonable than a for-profit industry goes. But there are different choices. People have options, when looking for services like GCMI provides, and we're happy to sit down and discuss what those choices are if needed, and try to find a right spot for a product to go forward, even if it's not with us.
You're on mute.
Okay, seriously, that is so bad. So what I was going to say is, I want to encourage anyone who has questions to put them in the chat. But in the meantime, I wanted to ask, where do we see medical devices fail? Like, what are the biggest hurdles or stumbling blocks that seem to plague the inventors the most?
I think we've touched on a lot of those. And it's really the reason why we created the Phase 0 program for feasibility. If you take off too fast and enter into formal product development before asking a lot of those questions that Amy rattled off earlier, and there's so many of them, but going back to the regulatory piece, the intellectual property, the market size, the clinical need, if you kind of just breeze over that without really putting in a really thorough amount of effort into characterizing each one of those, it's easy to get too far down the road and then discover, oh no, like we forgot that we needed to have, this component, or if the intellectual property piece wasn't really looked at closely, like there's another patent on the market and you've already wasted all this money, because you tried to get going too fast. So that's why we oftentimes say, slow down so that you can go faster. It really does pay off in the end.
Great. And thinking about just the process in general about working with GCMI. So I want to say one of the things that I love about GCMI is that you all can actually do kind of small batch manufacturing on some items to help prepare a team for clinical trials. You can also make sure they're sterilized and packaged appropriately. All of those kind of things that are really necessary to be able to use it in the clinic. And I think that that's a wonderful thing that you all offer. And I don't know if you want to maybe expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, I was wanting to mention that a key part that we have is a quality management system. And that's a series of standard operating procedures and forms and templates that is all per the FDA regulations and international standards for documenting the design and the manufacturing and the inspection. And so then you have a very thorough lot history of exactly what was made, which is required for good manufacturing practices and to be able to be a manufacturer of record for a preclinical run or clinical trials. And so we have that system in place, and it's customizable, and so we can customize it to each different client's needs.
And I'm going to mention one thing briefly that is important, especially it ties in both the funding aspect and the manufacturing aspect. But GCMI, along with ATDC and Georgia Manufacturing Extension Program, was awarded a grant about 1.5 years ago. And that grant can allow GCMI to work with early stage companies through ATDC. We can also work with Georgia MEP with regards to manufacturing, either small batch or larger, starting to setting up manufacturing here in Georgia. And there are funds available. So Center for MedTech Excellence is what somebody can search for, and the Apply Now button will take them through that process. If they have an idea or a product or med device they'll do digital, they'll do more than what GCMI can, they have a broad kind of scope in life science where they can support early stage devices or products and companies.
Great. And I just put my contact information in the chat. I want to say that some of the things that I do in my role are really to talk to people who have ideas and then help them figure out what the next step is. So maybe it's working with a faculty member or working with GCMI, or maybe it's helping them locate some of those resources they need to continue to move forward, like funding, maybe working with the group that Amy just talked about, or even the Pediatric Device Consortiums that can be used as a source of funding as well. So I think there's a lot of opportunities out there for medical device development. And specifically, when working with us in GCMI, I think we do have a really great program to help bring pediatric devices specifically to market. Is there any last question or any last comment from Saylan or Amy?
You go first, Saylan.
No, I think it's a really great time to be at GCMI, associated with PTC here in Atlanta. I think it's a great time for the pediatric market. Really excited about PEDS 2040 coming up. And yeah, I'm just excited for the future.
Great.
For me, one of the things we didn't touch upon during this call was that GCMI has a medical director, Dr. Emily Blum, and she's a valuable resource. She's a wonderful resource. She's a double board certified surgeon in the pediatrics realm. When we talk about clinical, experience, she's wonderful to kind of, bounce ideas off of. So it's another great resource that we are able to use and that we offer our clients and customers. And then the last thing that I'll mention is, we've talked about what the process is. We've talked about a lot of things that need to be covered throughout the process. And if GCMI doesn't have necessarily what you are thinking about or specifically what you need. I think that one of our greatest assets is the team. Saylan has, 9, 10 engineers that are phenomenal. And we have a massive network of people that we work with or can refer to if we don't have the information in-house. So Michael Fisher, who used to be with our organization, would say, we have a Rolodex. Not many people have Rolodexes anymore, but essentially we have a virtual Rolodex of contacts, and we're always happy to share information. There's a contact us on our website as well, gcmiatl.com, and please just feel free to reach out. We see all the comments that come through that link.
And I will say we are at time, and I want to be respectful of people's time. But if anyone can stay on, we did just get one more question. Are there any examples of pediatric technology brought up through GCMI now being used in clinic? And he mentions Dr. Hollister's work, which is super interesting and exciting. So if you can maybe just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it's a really exciting technology. So what the question is about Dr. Scott Hollister's airway splint device. And so it's a patient-matched implant that's 3D printed. It's a bioabsorbable material, polycaprolactone with hydroxyapatite. It's a really challenging device from a design perspective because it goes into small babies, approved through the FDA through humanitarian use device exemption. But it's a little tiny splint that holds the airway open. These babies are born with a tracheomalacia where the cartilage doesn't form in the trachea. So when they breathe, the airway collapses, and so they're always choking. So the device has to be strong enough to hold their airway open, but it also has to be weak enough to allow the patient to grow over time. It takes about 4 years for the material to resorb. So it's right on that balance of strong enough to hold it open, but weak enough to allow it to grow.
And Saylan, what was the FDA process that was followed for that?
It's called humanitarian use device exemption. So each patient, a case report goes to the FDA and they approve based on each individual patient. It also has to have IRB approval. There's a lot of approvals to it. And that's because it is a very rare disease. So as part of the orphan product designation as well and compassionate use. So because it's such a small, rare disease, it's really difficult to have the population required to do a clinical study and to go through the full pre-market approval process because it's the highest risk classification, a class 3 device. Does that answer the question?
I think that's great.
Okay.
And so I want to thank everybody for joining us today and staying on for an extra few minutes. And the recording will be made available hopefully within a week. We'll have it up on our website. Feel free to share it with anyone. And we look forward to seeing you all at our next Tech Talk. Thank you, Saylan, and thank you, Amy, for joining us.
Everyone.
Bye.
Bye.